Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Aaron Lavinsky, an award-winning photographer at the Minneapolis Star Tribune. We talk about how he got a start in photojournalism, why he enjoys enterprising journalistic projects, and an incredible collection of memories from 2020 on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But before we get to Aaron, be sure to check out some of the other podcasts Jewfolk produces, like The Jews Are Tired, where Lev Gringos is taking a deep dive into Jewish news, Kumbah Hineni, Jewfolk's podcast on intersectionality with your host Enzi Tanner, and Not Your Bubby's Nosh, Jewfolk's rebranded food podcast with Micah Siva. Go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast to learn more. Aaron Lavinsky, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You are a photographer for the Minneapolis Star Tribune, award-winning photographer for the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Been there about 9 years. What was it that got you interested in photography? Because as somebody who's worked in newspapers before working at working in sort of the internet space, I've worked with photographers on either sports events and news events for almost 30 years, and really have enjoyed that process. What was it that got you into the field?
It's a pretty long answer, so I apologize in advance. I used to love movies when I was a kid.
Okay.
Indiana Jones, anything Spielberg, Jaws. And my intention was to be a cinematographer. So at a very young age, I would notice things like special effects. Like there's a scene in Terminator 2 where you could see Arnold getting flying off a trailer. And I'm like, Emo, what are those strings? And she's like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, if you slow it down, you could see strings on Arnold. And I always could see that kind of stuff. I always had an eye for that. So I started photography in high school and videography. And I ended up graduating and going to film school, and then going to LA and doing the whole LA filmmaking thing for a few years. Kind of bombed out of it, super expensive. I was there in the subprime mortgage collapse. Really just a tough time to make it as a young person in general, but working in film wasn't working out. So I decided to go back to Arizona State. I lived in Arizona. I finished high school in Arizona. Got my degree in digital journalism. And I started kind of working at the student paper, spending a lot of time taking pictures of sports, portraits, news. And I found that I really loved kind of being the one-man band, going out and just kind of creating. And I liked the immediacy of news and kind of the pressure of news. And the rest is kind of history. I just kind of fell in love with visual storytelling, and ended up doing internships, and eventually found myself up here in the tundra and actually enjoying it. Yeah.
So you spent the bulk of your career has been at the Strip?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
now. Yeah. I mean, I've been there. This is my 9th year. So when I graduated, I'd done internships at the Seattle Times, the Arizona Republic. I worked one staff job before I was here at this tiny little paper in Aberdeen, Washington, which is famous for where Kurt Cobain was born.
Oh, sure.
And I was there for 1 year. On my 1-year anniversary, I'd gotten the job offer here. And I put in my 2 weeks, and I moved up to Minnesota.
Been here ever since.
No regrets. Met my wife here, and I've gotten just countless incredible experiences here.
So you mentioned before we started recording, your father's a rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
You did not want to go into the family business?
Did not. No, definitely not.
Did this devastate him?
I think he knew pretty early on. I couldn't stay still in shul. Like it really wasn't my scene. I was always kind of getting up and running around. I would always get kind of called back in by my mom for his sermons. And I love my dad's sermons. He's just a beautiful writer, and he's really, he's great at what he does. But I didn't love that. I didn't love singing. I didn't love some of the liturgy didn't really speak to me. We grew up in a conservative shul, and I would say more in like the conservative world.
Okay.
And having a father who is a rabbi who kind of came up, in kind of the Brooklyn, went to yeshiva, world of Judaism. It was probably closer to what many of my conservative friends saw as being kind of like modern Orthodox.
Okay.
So yeah, it wasn't really for me, and I love it and I appreciate it. And I think that like seeing how my dad worked with people in difficult moments probably helped me in a lot of ways. in my career. But no, I'm much better at taking photos than I am at, quoting, script, the
Talmud.
yeah, not for me. I remember the first line of my Haftorah, but I'm not going to recite that on Google.
All right, that seems reasonable.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. What was your Torah portion for your bar mitzvah, though?
Kitetse.
Okay.
Yeah, the shortest one.
Nice. That's see, you lucked out there.
Definitely, yeah, you luck. Wink, wink.
Wink.
Yeah.
It listen, it helps. It is who you know sometimes.
It
right?
is who you know. So yeah.
So the interesting thing about being a photographer and working in newspapers is, working in the media is very much a 24/7 job. That obviously Friday night, Saturday, what is Shabbat does not always work for you in the nature of the job, though, right? Like sometimes you've got news doesn't stop.
Yeah, up until even about last year, I can't even remember the last time I had Fridays or Saturdays off. Okay. I've never had them off. Not as an intern, not as a student. Fridays and Saturdays, a lot of things happen in the news, a lot of entertainment, sports, protests. So last year, my wife had converted and, she wanted to do more, live kind of a more Jewish lifestyle. So I kind of approached my editors about that. And now I work less Fridays so that I can do Shabbat.
Oh, nice.
But it doesn't always work out.
Right.
It's tough. It's definitely tough. There's always something going on. And there are also difficult days to staff too.
Oh, yeah.
Who wants to work Fridays and Saturday nights? We have a bunch of folks on our paper that have worked their way off of that shift, as I intend to one day.
Seniority has its privileges.
But 9 years is, I'm getting there.
Yeah.
It'll happen. And I hope that one day we'll have those days to ourselves.
Sure.
Actually rest, whatever that looks like.
Right. That's fair. So one of the more recent shoots that you had, or at least big stories you were a part of, was a fascinating story. Sports, what is nominally a sports story. But I think if you read the words of Chip Scoggins and look at the photos you took and the way it was presented, it goes way deeper than sports. It was a piece on the Red Lake Nation high school football team that hadn't won a football game, or still hasn't won a football game in
23 years.
23 years.
Yeah, 99 was the last game we could find that they won a game.
What was it like to go up there and shoot that? Because you're not shooting it just from like a typical high school sports perspective. When how much do you work with the reporter? How much do you sort of think about what the piece is going to look like before you go up there to shoot? So
to speak about how Chip and I work together, we work really well together. And a lot of that is the fact that we both will go out with a sense of curiosity, and we'll kind of pull our own threads. We don't sit down and say, well, this is the story and this is where we need to be at this moment. We just both kind of hang out and we just kind of see where things go. He probably has a bit more of an organized train of thought because he's a word person. But for me, my intention whenever I work on something that's longer term or enterprise, we like to call it, is I just like to spend as much time as possible in interesting spaces. And that's a very interesting place to me. Yeah. The people are very interesting. The culture is very interesting. The football is very interesting. There's just a lot going on. Yeah. And the more time I have to spend with them, the better chances I'll have of making compelling images. And then Chip and I will kind of take these threads that we've started pulling, whether it's more focused on the coach or more focused on the players, kind of converge and talk about what we've got and kind of start to hash out more of a focus. So I think we knew like the theme of them not winning in 20 plus years had to be a significant part of the story. But the more time we spent up there, the more we learned about the coach and his story of loss. And not just the coach's loss, but these kids that were, best friends with the coach's son who tragically died when he was 10 years old. Their loss too. And we started, seeing, there's a player who wears his son's number now. what is that? Let's talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
So the more time we spend up there, just the more threads we pull. And that's how we kind of come out with these longer term stories. We did this story on Austin basketball a few years ago, right before the pandemic, and it was kind of the same deal. We just kind of would go up, not even on the same days, totally different days. And I would figure out something really interesting, relay it to him. And then he goes back and he talks to them, and it kind of pulls that thread. And it ends up kind of working out perfectly. But, we have the luxury of having a lot of time.
Right.
And most stories aren't like that. Chip and I will be up there, sometimes at the same time. But a lot of the times we're not like with each other. We're not driving together. We're kind of operating separately.
Right.
He's doing his journalism. I'm doing my journalism. And at the end, we put it together and it comes out to this really interesting kick-ass. Can I say that?
You can say that.
Kick-ass package.
Right.
Telling this really important story.
And it's great because, as a photographer, you sort of have to in a lot of ways, I think, especially on a story like that, and, some of the other enterprise type work sort of blend into the scenery a little bit more so you can get the pictures that look natural and not posed or staged or things like that. And that's relationship building. You don't get to just go hang out and do that. There's a lot of work that goes into that.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. My goal is just not to be overly obtrusive. I think one thing younger photographers will do is they'll take out the widest lens in their kit and get as close as possible with that lens and make pictures that are very in your face. I don't really do that. I try to stay back. I try to be very deliberate about when I take pictures and where I take pictures. And I try to operate just very quietly. But also when there aren't pictures to be made, or I see that the moment isn't there, I'll chat with the players and I'll get to know them and I'll get to know the coach, and we've all got a really good relationship. Sometimes kids will be like, "So I've seen you around a lot. What are you doing here?" I remember there's I call him a school resource officer, an SRO.
Yeah,
was the assistant coach of the team. And he's like, at the last day I'm there, he's like, "Wait, so what is this all for?" And I'm like, "The Star Tribune." He's like, "Oh shit." So people will have that conversation with me, what is this? And I'll kind of tell them this is what I'm going for. So
right.
Don't be surprised if those post photos that you took earlier don't end up making the cut, but I'm glad to have taken them. It took a long time with this group to stop posing. But it's funny because one of the lead images in the double truck, which is the big page when you open it up, two pages, is one of those photos of them kind of posing for the camera.
Right.
And normally I would throw a picture like that out for most assignments, but we looked at it, we're like, this is actually a really fascinating photo. You see their faces, you see their bodies and their football helmets and the body language.
Right.
And so I try not to over edit my photos in advance necessarily. I'll just shoot it and go back and
see what the editor and how much say does a writer get on a piece like that? Because I know I never, when I was covering sports in college and be at soccer game or volleyball tournament, I didn't really get a say. I'd go buy the paper the next day and be my article in one of the photos that the shooter took, but I didn't have any say, or there was no conversation about anything like that.
I have a picture editor. I mean, I work very closely. There's a lot of voices in the room for a story.
Yeah,
it's not. These decisions aren't happening in a vacuum. Everything's very deliberate. Every photo choice is supposed to tell a certain part of the story.
Okay.
So my picture editor for this was Kevin Martin, who's just a phenomenally talented photo editor. And then we worked with a digital designer, a print designer, and then they have a voice. And then we work with the sports editor who works with Chip. There's also the high school sports editor too. So a couple of different layers of editing for him.
Okay.
And then, we get to a point where it starts getting bigger and we're like, okay, this is going to go in the A section. So then the active managing editor comes in, and then a few days before the editor in chief comes in, and, when it's all said and done, probably 20, 25 people.
Wow.
Yeah. It's very, very involved.
That's
a lot of
astounding.
a lot of meetings, a lot of, having to kill our darlings, so to speak. There's photos that I love that'll never be published from this. There's anecdotes and graphs that he wrote that never got published.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the nature of the beast, but I think it ends up coming out to like a really tightly edited, nice package. Does the job.
Yeah. And I hope people will sort of enjoy the behind the scenes look of how something like that comes together, or the how the sausage is made perspective on this, because I mean, I've been in media for a very long time, so I find this kind of thing interesting. But I think for people who just pick up the paper on a daily basis or log in to the Strib or to their media site of choice on a daily basis, like there's a lot of intentional choices that get made in the process for how something comes together, whether it's a game story from either be it the Twins or high school baseball or football, any level of sport, to packages like that. Like there choices get made along the way of how to tell a story,
Framing of it,
mm-hmm.
All that structure. Yeah, and then this one particularly, a lot of it was the fact that we're outsiders. We're not from the reservation.
Sure.
They're understandably not totally trustworthy of the media. They had a school shooting there many years ago, and that was, something that we had to be very sensitive when it came to approaching or not approaching.
Right.
And there were certain themes that we, really avoided altogether up there. We didn't want to get into too much poverty themes.
No, for sure.
For this was about the coach. This is about these kids.
The kid, right? Exactly.
And we had to kind of look at the story too, and kind of think about what, especially in terms of the losses and like them being beaten every time, every game.
Right.
How much do you want to hammer that in?
Right.
And we made some decisions not to be too much hammered. It's not about them losing.
Right.
It's about them still feeling like they're winning, still feeling like they're achieving,
right.
And seeing the coach succeed. And it's not easy to do.
Yeah.
But that's the luxury of having time to tell the story, is being able to do it right.
Absolutely. The other, you've been involved in lots of, over the course of 9 years, many, events, projects of the sort. But one of the areas that, because the Star Tribune won a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage, and you were heavily involved in, was the George Floyd, the uprisings and protests following his murder. What was it like to be? It was with the obvious of everything swirling around that, plus the early stages of COVID, and people didn't really know what was going on, other than we were all sort of sheltering in our homes a lot at that point. What was that time period like? How do you, it's been a couple of years, have you had sort of the ability to look back and reflect at all on what that time period was like?
Yeah, it was really tough. We were all pretty terrified of COVID to begin with, and then having to go out and cover that level of unrest and violence and sadness was really tough. And I think it took a toll on all of us. My wife, she covers public safety for the Star Tribune. She was out there pretty much every night. I actually got hurt very early on during the protests. I rolled my ankle when I was tear gassed outside the precinct.
Oh.
Sprained it and had to take a couple of days off to be able to walk again. And then I was out there marching, 6-7 miles, limping around town. It was wild, and I had to do about 6 months of physical therapy to be able to get that back.
Yeah.
So like that was all going on. And then COVID was happening concurrently. And COVID, to me, I felt a lot. I covered a lot of the aftermath of George Floyd and Dante Wright, but COVID, I really kind of went all in on. I spent a lot of time in hospitals. I ended up building this great relationship with the team at Newark Memorial in their intensive care unit. So I spent probably 25 days in the ICU at Newark Memorial, working on not just this one story that published last year, but also just general news photography of COVID, always trying to kind of stay ahead of whatever the story was, whether it was unvaccinated patients filling the ICU. I was there when the first vaccinations arrived. So, it was really amazing was I got an email from, a Flack with the governor.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you doing tomorrow at 7 a.m.? And I'm like, what should I be doing tomorrow at 7 a.m.? And then they told me that the first case of the COVID vaccine is going to be coming in. So before I know it, I'm with the governor wearing his buffalo plaid, like looking at the box as it's coming off the FedEx truck and, being unboxed and stored. And so I was really following COVID very closely as a beat, throughout that entire year, and ended up coming off pretty much all my other coverage. Got taken off sports coverage.
Really?
Because I usually cover the Gophers football team.
Okay.
And I was like, I can't be going in on Saturday to cover a Gophers football game. And then on Sunday, this story publishes of, COVID patients,
Right.
dying on the front page of the paper. It wouldn't be a good look for anybody.
Right.
So it was really a difficult time to really be fully immersed in COVID. So that's, for me, that doesn't seem to be coming back anytime soon, I hope.
Knock on wood.
Is there wood?
I don't
Knock
think
on
so.
drywall.
Drywall it is, yeah.
So my, I had to get certified to use N95 masks. I had to get certified by the hospitals to be able to use their PPE, so I could actually go into rooms with COVID patients. And to my knowledge, I'm not sure, with the exception of maybe one or two photographers for like the New York Times or the AP, anybody else had that kind of access.
Wow.
And the crazy thing is that I could see my house because I live in Robbinsdale from the South 7 intensive care. So I can walk into a room there and look out the window and see my house.
It's crazy.
And that really was like striking to me.
Yeah.
And that made me really passionate too, because I know what that perspective is like from there.
Yeah.
The people down on the ground don't see that.
Mhm.
So I really threw myself in a big way.
It's like you're so close to like the normalcy of home, but like when you're all gowned up and masked up and all the PPE is on, it's so far away.
Correct.
So it's interesting you mentioned having the idea of having a beat as a photographer. I find interesting because obviously as a reporter, you get used to that, but I never really thought of a photographer having a beat in the same way.
Yeah. We have a pretty large photo staff.
Okay.
And I don't think anybody has a beat carved out. I don't think anybody is going to get upset if, so like Glenn Stubbe, who's a phenomenal photographer, he does a lot of the politics work.
Okay.
He's at the Capitol a lot. He has great relationships with politicians and their aides from across the aisle. And he is probably the first call for a lot of the political coverage.
Okay.
That said, like we'll all jump in.
Sure.
And we'll all cover that too. So it's not the same as maybe working a beat on the writing side, where if somebody comes in and writes a story on your beat, it's like not great.
Yeah.
But we have a team of people that cover Vikings, and that's kind of their thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I'd call it a beat because it's 4 people, but 4 people cover the Vikings.
Yeah.
So for me, COVID was something that I really like. That was kind of, I took some level of ownership over it.
Okay.
Because I had that PPE training, I had that N95 training.
Sure.
I had those relationships too. And I was at the point where I could get on the phone, which was tremendously valuable during the peak of COVID. Get on the line with a PR person from North Memorial, and Health Fairview, to a lesser degree, Hennepin Healthcare, and essentially get in the hospital.
Okay.
And for a story like COVID, being able to get in when we wanted to get in was huge.
Right. So what's your favorite thing that you've shot? I know it's hard to look back at 9 years and maybe pinpoint one game or story or image that sort of ingrained, but what really stands out to you?
Don't give me a second.
Yeah.
Probably for sports, I loved covering the Ryder Cup.
Yeah.
The Ryder Cup was just magnificent. It was so much fun. It was so much work. It was such a challenge. so much walking.
Yeah.
But it was also like a great vibe. I remember like Rory McIlroy hit the eagle on the last day, and there were like 70 or 80,000 people. Right,
It was insane.
You went?
I did not go, unfortunately. I was stupid. I should have gone.
Oh, it was wild.
I'm looking forward to, I think 28. It's back at Hazeltine.
It's 28. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to going back to that.
I hope I get that assignment.
Yeah.
This time around. We had a lot of resources on that.
Yeah.
But that was just so much fun. Just the interest that I've never thought of myself as somebody that likes golf. I don't think I've watched golf since then. But it just kind of showed me that anything could be interesting with that much color and attention.
Yeah.
Seeing like the nationalistic, USA.
Yeah, good old fashioned jingoistic.
Yeah, people walking around eagle masks, and
Yeah.
It was really quite a scene. Typically, though, like when it comes to the news, I don't want to call it my favorite. I think like as a news photographer, I'm driven to be where there's public interest.
Sure.
So I don't necessarily like covering things like unrest. I don't like covering COVID, but I also feel like a sense of obligation and a sense of fulfillment from covering things that are.
Mhm.
So those are things that I wouldn't necessarily like. I love covering them. I didn't love covering. It was stressful. It was terrible. But also it was important to do. And I felt, when I would hear from families, perhaps the people that died. I mean, I had a couple of people who posted on share stuff on Instagram.
Yeah.
Were like, that was my coach. I really appreciate that you were there his last day, and you actually spoke to him. He actually told me that he regretted decisions not to get a vaccine. He said you should get vaccinated. I hear from some of the patients that got better,
Mhm.
And they were really thankful that we were able to get in there and tell the story. People whose loved ones gave me permission to photograph them, but had no idea until a month or 2 months later that they were part of this big story.
Right.
That they felt good about. It was really meaningful.
There's such an obligation in the media that, I think most of us who do this work take really seriously. I think obviously there are some who take it decidedly less seriously, but it is a public service in a lot of ways. It's just of vital importance.
Absolutely. In the last few years, it's been maybe perhaps more so.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we try to shine the light in dark places.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard as a daily news photographer to kind of do that all the time.
Sure.
A lot of what we cover isn't that. A lot of what we cover can be business portraits and general news and press conferences. But occasionally we get stories that are really important. And I think it's just important to take those seriously and to approach them like it is a public service. My wife, again, covering public safety, I think she's a lot closer to that than I am on a daily basis. But I definitely, recognize when I'm working on something that is like that. And I kind of feel myself that way.
And I will have to reach out to Liz and see if she would be interested in coming on at some point.
I'm sure she would love it. She's been on the radio a whole bunch, and she doesn't like the live element of the radio. So this is great. And she'll talk your ear off.
Fantastic. This is Liz, I enjoy, and look, as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, I sort of enjoy. I like getting the behind the scenes. Like, to me, that kind of thing is interesting. The behind the scenes of you and Chip going, up to the reservation or down to Austin, and the pictures from the Austin story were incredible. And again, it's like you in a high school classroom, you on a driveway of a dark night, or was it like first thing in the morning of kids going to practice, like leaving home to go to practice. Like, there is such humanity in that. It's just the basic everyday things that high school kids do, but when put together in a package like that, tells such a deep, compelling story.
And it just brings them such pride.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that, not only did we tell this story up in Red Lake, but they're also really proud of it. They're proud of what they've accomplished. They're proud of their coach. They're proud of their team. And I've heard from a lot of people that were just stunned that we decided to go up there and spend that kind of time with them, and they're just so happy for the most part. I mean, maybe there's somebody that isn't happy. I don't know. It's very possible. Like, wish they never came up here. But from who I've heard from, they're very happy. Same with Austin. One of the coolest recognitions that Chip and I have gotten was the fact that we got the key to the city of Austin.
Did you really? That's awesome.
It's in my 2020 shadow box of weird, tear gas canisters and N95 masks and positive COVID tests and the key to the city of Austin.
That is quite the year you had.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. Yeah, it was really cool. But we came there and there was a bunch of kids from the team that were there to present it to us.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was great. We really, when we work on these stories, it's hard not to root for the people that we're documenting.
Yeah.
We really care. We really do care about all of them. They're so gracious with their time and just opening up their lives to us. It's hard not to look at them like friends. And
right.
I spent Thanksgiving with Agua, his family from the Austin story.
Wow.
And it was photographed, but I didn't take that many pictures. It was just, I ended up just kind of hanging out with them. And,
Yeah.
Meeting all of his siblings and, just that is just awesome.
See, you're part of a Pulitzer-winning team, but you also got the key to Austin. So
That's right. Yeah. And I should preface the Pulitzer thing missing. There were a lot of people.
Oh, no. Obviously, you were part of, when I say you're part of the team that won it for the coverage at the Strip,
it was a big team.
It was a big team
that
was part of that. But not many people get to say they were part of something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, enjoy the accolades that come with it. But I mean, also the key to Austin. It's I don't know how you. But there is such a, and in all seriousness, there is something touching and fun that comes from recognition at that level. It shows the community that you cover in that way. It shows how much they care about the work that you put into it, and that they appreciated the work that went into it.
Totally. And they're, that's something, that's the ultimate award.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we could nerd out on stuff all day, but I'm going to let you get back to your well-earned vacation that you are currently on, and we appreciate you taking time out of it to talk to me.
Going to Costco.
I know, good times.
Excited, yeah.
Big plans. Last couple of questions. First, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Pesach.
Okay, how come?
Compulsory wine. Usually a brisket.
Yeah.
I love, they're like these croutons. They're like the puffy croutons with matzo ball soup.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, those are so good. I know what they're called. Soup mandel.
Yeah, the soup mandel. Yep.
So definitely in my mind.
Okay.
And that's for us, my wife, she'll go home. We'll go home for Christmas because her family celebrates Christmas. Sure. And that's still an important kind of cultural family celebration. Mm-hmm. We like going back home for awesome for us. Gets everybody at the table. Great.
That's awesome. And what's your favorite Jewish food?
Favorite Jewish food? I'm going to have to go with bagels. Yeah, I mean, is that Jewish? I think that's Jewish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bagel with lox and capers and tomatoes and onions. We went to New York a few months back. We had 3 or 4 New York weddings this year.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. 3 New York weddings.
Okay.
Within a month. Yeah, it was bad. Spent a lot of time in New York.
That's too much.
And we got some really good bagels. But I'm trying to think, is bagels, is that I love poppy seed hamantash.
I do too. Those are my favorite hamantash.
100%. Yeah, those are so good. Extra hamantash, extra poppy seed.
Well, I'm the only one in our house who eats the poppy seed. So when we make them, we tend to do more exotic.
Like peanut butter cup stuff?
Peanut butter cup, cookie butter, like the Biscoff cookie butter.
I haven't done that.
Oh, cookie butter is really good. Lemon curd, also really good. Mm-hmm. But if I'm going to the synagogue, the Purim carnival and getting hamantash in, I'm getting poppy seed.
There's one, there's also a pastry I love. And it's not actually made from marzipan, but in Israel, it's the marzipan rogalach. You can get it.
Yeah.
And it's like a chocolate bar per rogalach. It's so good. And you used to be able to order it online. I'm trying to get cheese.
probably try to not.
That's why
those don't sound terribly healthy.
It's the tragedy of kosher Jewish food. It's heavily margarinated.
Yeah.
A lot of trans fat, a lot of trans fat. So just trying to, and then also like we have, in my mind, Bubby's chicken. We call it my mom's chicken.
Okay.
Shabbos chicken. Just like chicken with Montreal chicken seasoning. So
can't beat it.
Can't beat it. So easy. So easy to make.
That's awesome. Well, Aaron Lavinsky, thank you so much for joining me.
you.
This has been a blast, and looking forward to continuing to see your work in the Star Tribune. We appreciate you coming on.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.